Okay, so you are in stream 1, and welcome everybody to this first session of the Fit for Food 2030 in our second day. And you are here for the roadmaps for the future RNI breakthroughs of the food system. My name is Jonas Lazaro-Mojica, and I come from FoodDrinkEurope. And also in our presentation, we will have Hugo de Vries, who is the research director for the food bioeconomy at INRAE. So today, we have less time than expected, but we will hope to cover all the items that we have on our presentation today. So first, and this is just for the meeting etiquette, please mute your microphones and your camera so we can have a better connection. Please, any technical problems, address to Michela Miani. And for any question, please place your questions in the chat, and Beatrix Webner kindly offer herself to actually gather all these inputs and have them at the end of the session in a Q&A session. Also, for all you to know, this session is being recorded. So first of all, thank you all for joining us today, and thank you for all the partners of the project that participated. It has been 3 years of work that I'm going to try to summarize in about 10 minutes. So I hope I can answer the main questions. So what are the questions that I would like to bring to you today? So this is what are breakthroughs, why breakthroughs are relevant, what were the most relevant outputs from the Fit for Food 2030 regarding breakthroughs, what are the tools and materials available from this project that you can use already, for whom are they intended, and then we'll have an example of a case of how can we use breakthroughs in a real RNI agenda setting. So let me go a little backwards, because I know that you all come from very different backgrounds and you might not know the project from your heart. So first, why breakthroughs are needed? And we should start saying that we have challenges in the food systems, challenges ahead that comes from the COVID-19 as the most recent ones, but obviously it came from before, things like climate change, sustainability, biodiversity, Brexit, name it. The question is, do we need RNI for an enabler and deliver more sustainable solutions and have a better food systems? Our answer is yes, and that was the answer as well from the European Commission yesterday in the speech of John Bell and the aim of the project. All this comes in the context of food systems, and why this is relevant is because in this context or this understanding, we have a lot of trade-offs. So we have to keep a multi-stakeholder approach, multidisciplinary, multi-sectorial to actually tackle all the possibilities that we have. All this comes in a context of RNI policy in Europe, mainly the Food 2030 policy, but also the Farm to Fork strategy, the Common Agricultural Policy, the circular economy, the bioeconomy, the biodiversity, all embedded in the Horizon Europe. So that's the context that we would like to discuss with you today. Why this is relevant is because the overall aim of Fit for Food 2030 is to support the European Commission with the development and implementation of the Food 2030 Research and Innovation Policy Framework to future-proof the European food systems. So that's why we have a topic in breakthroughs. And breakthroughs, the way that we define it in this project, are potential and significant achievements that may lead to an increased impact of the current, on the current initiatives in the field of food nutritional security and a step towards radical change of the food system, making it more sustainable and resilient. What are breakthroughs? You may be wondering, and some exercises that we did in the project, and actually that was the first question that we had, is how do we understand breakthroughs? And we started looking at the past, because the best way of understanding things were with examples. So we thought what we could consider a breakthrough. And we consider a breakthrough as something that really changes our society, as an idea that really is radical and changes things in a way that weren't done before. Here we have some examples that we were considered breakthroughs, like the discovery of vitamins, which was an effort from research, mainly from universities and also research centers, to discover these new chemicals in nutrition, but also the microwaves, which were obtained through private investment from the discovery of the radar technology in the Second World War, or the Green Revolution, which was a policy framework framed internationally from different countries like United States and Mexico and many other for a new agricultural framework in the 60s and 70s. And we have other examples like the supermarkets in the early 30s and 40s in the United States, microcredits at the end of the 20th century, or the online shopping as the most recent breakthrough that we might have, very, very recent and very, very present today. And why breakthroughs are relevant and how do we understand it in the Fit for Food 2030? We approach this model we call the multi-framework model. The name doesn't matter much, it's in the literature. But basically what we try is to triangle things like trends, showcases, and breakthroughs, and potential breakthroughs. And here potential breakthroughs are relevant because our look to the future is based on this. And then is where we can think, where do we want to put our investment or our funding to actually change the society in the way that we want. For examples here, trends, they were explained yesterday in the session 1. Trends are considered things that are happening but really cannot change. It's just happening in the society. Some examples are climate change. That's why I have that picture of the polar bear. But it could be consumer behavior. It could be depletion of resources. It could be the way that we eat, how we actually have lifestyles. There are many things that could be considered trends. And actually we have a whole work package researching what trends we have in this society. Then we have showcases or cases. These are projects, these are businesses, these are entrepreneurs doing things in innovation at local level or regional level or a small scale that are really changing things, but they are not yet changing completely our society, but they are the starting point. And it's very interesting to look at them because then we have a pathway or a roadmap to know what will come into the future. For example, in this case, I have vertical farming or urban farming where you can see another ways of growing plants. And then we come up to potential breakthroughs. And these are things that might come up into the future, might come up a reality, but hasn't come yet. So the question is, do we want these breakthroughs to have to come up to us? Do we want those changes? And then if we have to make a research and innovation agenda, how can we boost it? What are the barriers? What are the incentives? So that's the questions that we had in this work package of the project. So here I'm going to tell you a little more of what we did within the project within the last 3 years. So what I explained already was our starting point of what is a breakthrough, how do I consider it, do I have examples? But we then consider that we should have a map of the current breakthroughs. So current topics that we see that are happening now at a smaller scale as showcases, but might come up as a future. So then we did an inventory of breakthroughs. And perhaps what is different here than other projects is that we used different approaches. So we used a survey approach, an experts approach. We used the trends and showcases that we had from the other work packages, but we also used city labs to try to engage stakeholders that were not usually engaged. City labs are explained elsewhere in the project context, but city labs at the end are small communities where you can, or living labs where you can bring different stakeholders from teachers to citizens to entrepreneurs to SMEs to actually engage all together on a vision as well of the food system. All these add to the usual stakeholders like industry, policymakers, and academics. So all these ingredients came up for this inventory. And then the next question is, okay, we have this inventory, so how do we prioritize on our INRAE agenda? And for that, we work on the critical success factors and barriers. This is a step between prioritizing, but this is also relevant to know how each topic or breakthrough reflects on all the trade-offs that might happen in a systemic view. Then we had a more theoretical approach, and we had a position paper on all this theoretical framework to understand how do we understand breakthroughs. And finally, we have recommendations and materials to be used for anyone attempting to do these exercises in a workshop, for example. So here we have material in the breakthrough cards to actually do a workshop in a business, where they want to face what could be the topics of the future for the company, but also for policymakers at national, region, local, or EU level to actually make options and decisions in the context. So first, I'm going to just disclose part of our inventory. You can see there are some pictures. Those are the showcases. So those pictures are from businesses and projects that are happening already. And we created 4 main domains or blocks. It could have been done differently, but we chose this to actually just classify a little all the topics that we had in these possible RNI breakthroughs, which then they had their own topics within. So for example, it's better to explain in practice. We have this domain, the new approach of primary food production and distribution. And there we have things like breeding or new techniques and applications in agriculture, smart farming, non-conventional production systems, reduction of impact of production, new value systems, new agriculture. To put an example, then if you go to smart farming, then we'll have the topics that could be sensors, could be mapping with radars or with drones, it could be applications, any means that actually come into this specific breakthrough. Our second block or domain was an engaged and healthy consumer. Here we had topics like an empowered consumer, change of dietary habits, new tools to improve nutrition and health, and new methods in education. Our third block was considered more technological or more the tools of a future food-proof system. And here we had topics like logistics, smart traceability in the food supply chain, a novel approach to biotechnology, information and communication technologies, so ICT or digitalization applied to the food system, food industry 4.0 or novel and efficient food processing, sustainable packaging, diversity on the diet, and the global food analysis. Our fourth block was more transversal, and it had topics in the sustainable and dynamic value-based food system, which were more engaging social innovation, like food for society, but also circularity in the food systems, efficient use of resources, more sustainable parameters, and policy and management within the food system, so governance. And okay, we had our inventory, but we wanted to make it more as a tool or something that it could be used in the future for anyone to attempt to do this again or to prioritize. So then we created this concept of breakthrough cards. Here you see the 22 topics that we have, and each of them we created sort of a card, which is a 2-3 pager document, which we have the specific RNI topics per RNI breakthrough. We have the expected impact. We have the market opportunities, but when we say market, we also say acceptance from consumers. We have example references in the literature. We have trends and showcases that are linked within the project. So it's not general, but how other materials of the project interlink to these breakthrough cards. And if you have interest, you can find them in our website in this link. We'll provide all the links at the end. But anyway, it's open for everyone, so you can just go to our webpage in project outputs and go to the inventory of possible RNI breakthroughs in food systems. There you have it embedded as a website tool, but you can also download it as a PDF, so then you can do your own workshops with printouts and so on. Then what can you do with these breakthrough cards or breakthrough exercises? We did this in the policy labs, sorry, in the city labs, and it was to question what were the barriers, what were the factors, enablers for these breakthroughs to come through in our local context. So for example, if we do a workshop in a specific country, we could use these workshops to somehow select or prioritize the breakthroughs that we think are more relevant for our particular context. And there we had things like who were the local actors, what were the driving forces, which incentives were helpful, whether funding or public investment or private investment, which barriers had to overcome, which new relationships and interactions were necessary. And also we followed in some of these workshops a STEEP approach, which is to consider the social, technology, economic, environmental, political, legal, and ethical aspects that this breakthrough might have. So it's a systemic approach from multi-stakeholders on how actually these breakthroughs come through in our local context. For that also, we thought it was of relevance of how do we do these workshops. So we created a tool, which is in our Knowledge Hub, with exercise for identifying potential INRAE breakthroughs. And that you can find in our website as well, with this title, within a lot of materials that you can find for other exercises as well. So these are our outcomes. So you can find all these tools and materials. Whenever we share this presentation, you can access these links. But anyway, we would like to share as well the links at the end in the Q&A session. There you have the inventory, the Knowledge Hub tools, the policy brief, and deliverables of the project. And now, in the next part of the presentation, what I would like to do is to have a case or a practical case where we actually had a specific workshop with the SCAR Standing Committee for Agriculture, which is an organization planified within the European Commission, to actually work with foresight scenarios implementing RNI breakthroughs. This is more a technical part, but what we'll try to explain is how can we do these exercises to obtain information that we can use in our local networks. So I will give the floor to Hugo de Vries. Hugo, the floor is yours.
Many thanks, Jonas. Can you hear me? Yeah?
Yes.
Okay. Hopefully the others as well. Otherwise you'll have 20 minutes of rest. It's a great pleasure to go on where Jonas stopped, and with the presentation of the RNI breakthroughs, we also posed a question in the SCAR working group on food systems. Is there a way how we can prioritize them in a specific context? And already Jonas said some words about it. This is an alternative way of doing that, and I will try to explain how. So the title is Utilizing Scenarios to Prioritize Possible Future RNI Breakthroughs in Food Systems. Many thanks to all the moderators that were helping us. What were the objectives of this workshop, and why do I like to share it with you as an audience? Because we think, Jonas and myself, that it could be relevant in your own context, either in your community, in your country, in your network of enterprises, in your research organization, or where else. So therefore we like to share it, and therefore we like to share also what were the objectives. The first one was getting some insights and experience in working with scenarios. The second, understanding how scenarios can be utilized to prioritize possible future RNI breakthroughs. And the third is consider it, utilizing it in your own context. But then the question immediately is, what is the goal of scenario thinking? Scenarios are made to better understand current options, like the RNI breakthroughs, or infrastructures or policy measures, in view of potential futures. This kind of process and way of thinking is already quite dated, because it goes back to the 80s, where companies like Shell developed it and where others were using it in their own context. The next slide, please. Now you can do two things in a very simplified way that is sketched here. A little bit as Jonas showed, you can do it in a forecasting way or in a strategic planning way. There you have your trends and all your data, and your trends are something that is certain because it takes place. And with all that you have, you can extrapolate and you can end up in optimistic, realistic, or pessimistic options for your future, somewhere in 2050. But in scenarios, it's different. You're standing still today with all your data, but also with all your uncertainties, and you jump in the future, either in 2050 and 2070, and then you look back. So you do a backcasting approach and see what is most relevant for those scenarios that you may have developed for your future. The next slide, please. Then what are scenarios, or what are characteristics of scenarios? At least they should be plausible, logical, consistent, and believable. They should be relevant. They should highlight key challenges and dynamics of the future. They should be divergent. They should differ from one another in strategically significant ways. And they should be challenging. They should challenge our fundamental beliefs and assumptions. So the process itself should provoke thinking rather than providing answers per se, and it should guide us. The scenario should be contrasting in order to face potential extreme futures and not being biased by only searching for positive options. And sometimes we have a tendency to do this. But let's take COVID 20 or 30 years ago. Who was imagining that COVID could take place and really disturbs overall our society at large? And scenarios should be evidence-based and thoroughly discussed by experts in the field. Recognize that the real future will not be any of the scenarios, but that it will contain elements of all our scenarios. Now, I say this in this way: if there is somebody who is able to look in the future via a glass bulb, please send immediately your application letter to Jonas and myself, because there are quite some jobs for you in the future. The next slide, please. Now, if you look in literature, there are many different scenarios already developed or are in development, but still the question remains, which of those are relevant for you? If you look here, the World Economic Forum developed scenarios, the food industry, for example, the German food industry, more from a production side, the Global Land Outlook developed scenarios, or the Agreement de Terra. There are many different ways in which scenarios are developed. But are they relevant for you? So next slide, please. That is the key question, and before you can answer that, you have to go through quite a long process. It is depicted here. In order to say if something is relevant for you, you first need to address the right question that you really like to ask. So for that, you need to get focused. That's the first phase. Then you need to develop a kind of a framework for the scenarios where you can have those contrasting scenarios. Then there is a third phase where you have to build the scenarios. You have to give them a name, an image, a short description. And finally, you have to work with them to see really if they are helping to address your question and helping you in prioritizing all those potential options that you have. If normally this full process takes 1 week plus a long time of preparation, literature, research, and so on. And we had only 2 times half a day. So we focus on the last part. The next slide, please. So where did we focus on? We focused on a core question that was already posed and to which we can refer the scenarios to. We already prepared the axis, which helps us in positioning the contrasting scenarios. So there are here on the right-hand side, there are 4 scenarios presented with 2 axes, a blue one, a green one, a red one, and a gray one. And the axis allows to put extremes. I will give certainly an example in the next slide. And then also we explained the way how we can utilize the scenarios to prioritize possible options. If you take the scenarios, the blue, the green, the red, and the gray one, and you position them next to each other, and you select a number of research and innovation breakthroughs, as Jonas has shown, then you can more or less check them with each scenario. And to see if they fit, then you give them pluses. If they are neutral, then you give them a 0. Or are they in conflict or not at all relevant for a scenario, then you give them a minus. You can give more pluses and more minuses. The next slide, please. So our workshop, in fact, and I repeat this once more to make it clear and also for you to see if it could be a relevant option for you in your context. For the workshop, the core question was posed and provided by the moderators. The axes were also already delivered, but both were discussed to see if the group who was exploring the core question was really convinced that it was the good question to pose and the axes were also relevant or not. And then they developed the scenarios, they discussed them, they named them, and they visualized them. The next step was to work with the scenarios to prioritize the options. And the final part of the workshop was there to check if the prioritized options really fit in the countries which were represented by the participants. Suppose that the priority that came out of it was related to marine diving, but you are based in one of the mountain areas in Switzerland or Austria, of course it was not so relevant. There is somebody who is giving an additional comment, I think. Would you mind to switch off your microphone? Thank you. We go to the next slide, and I like to see if I can overrule the other person who is speaking. So the next slide is an example, an illustration, and an illustration that we also use for the workshop. Suppose that our core question is, how will I consume sustainably a healthy Mediterranean fresh dish in Scandinavia today and tomorrow? Of course, the people in the Nordic countries should prefer to turn it around, a Nordic diet eaten in the Mediterranean area, but excuse me to them, I've put it in this way and I hope you accept it. If you look to this core question to really become familiar with it, try to image what is really in this question. So look, if you see fresh dishes from the Mediterranean, you can think about feta salads or a salade niçoise or something else. If you look to the word fresh, you immediately can relate it to losses, unfortunately. If you look to Mediterranean and Scandinavia, you can think about landscapes, about environments in which you eat. If you pose the question, but who is I? I'm a happy person, I'm a sad person. It all depends on our context. And with this kind of thinking and imaging, you can really refine and target your question. The next slide, please. If you have this question, then you can define your axes. They are here. It's a little bit a dense picture, but I try to explain it as well as possible. Those axes need to show extremes. Already incorporated in the question is one, that is today versus tomorrow, or the short term and the long term. Another one is more or less incorporated in the word sustainability. If you put at front economics and you have unlimited budgets, you can position it at one side of the X. And if you say economy is not at all relevant, everything that's relevant is our planet, I put that first, you can put it at the other side of the axis. And if you have then those two axes, you can define your 4 scenarios. At the bottom left, if you have unlimited budget and today is important for you, then something that is produced this morning in the Mediterranean needs to be at your plate in the evening. Thus you need an airplane. You, of course, have a kind of a global convenience lifestyle. It is important what you eat today. But if you have a little bit more time, then still you have an unlimited budget, then you think already a little bit green because time is less important. You can choose a boat, even though for you it is green at any cost, because you still like to have your products. It doesn't matter what it costs, but convenient at your plate and in the best shape. Everything could be done for you. But if you think about tomorrow and the planet first, then you often think about your children, and whatever you do, you should do it with minimal energy. You should do it with packaging materials that will not impact our planet, quite a challenge. And so you can think about biodegradable packaging. You can think about solar energy driven systems for storage and transport, etc. It's another kind of scenario. And if you think about the planet first and today, then you have a problem because you cannot use the airplane for transport, but you have to go in your own garden. And the best what you can do is buy a book and see how it is produced in the Mediterranean and try to see if your climate allows to do it in your own garden. It's again another scenario. If you have other axes, you will have, of course, other scenarios. Next slide, please.
Sorry, Hugo, I think we should be aiming for the conclusion soon, as time really passes by.
That fits very well. Next slide, please. if there is a next. Yes, this slide again gives the plus and minuses. So all the options that Jonas has presented, you can check with the scenarios, and you can see which got the most pluses. That is your most important R&I breakthrough to invest in time and money. And if you go down, then of course it becomes less interesting if you consider the scenarios as your key options for the future. Next slide, please. If you post another question, you get, of course, other scenarios. This is what has been done in the working group. So I go to the next slide, where we have posted 5 different questions for 5 different working groups within the workshop. So those questions have been the driver to develop a set of 4 different scenarios and axes. It all depends on what are your real questions in your own context, and that drives the scenarios that you like to develop. So I like to conclude with the last slide. What did we learn from the workshop? And of course, it should not be me, but it should be the participants who say that. But now I have the word, so I will try to give it. I will do it. I will try to summarize what the people have said. They have considered it as a useful, pragmatic, and especially engaging activity, which has been evoking many creative thoughts. They think it's appropriate to do it in 2 times half a day, but certainly not less. They also said that the main objective to become acquainted with this process has been reached. We have to put a disclaimer because in 2 times half a day, you cannot do in-depth development of scenarios, even though already the scenarios that has been discussed and presented and also used to prioritize the options has a relevance, as the people have said, in their own context, and also has a relevance for our SCAR working group on food systems. And with that, I'd like to give back the word to Jonas.
Thank you very much, Hugo. I'm sorry for rushing you up. It's just that we started later, so I was hoping to have some time for some discussions. So, Beatrix, if you are there, do we have any questions?
Yes, we had a question, and I think that's addressed to Hugo. How were the participants in the workshop selected? So who was participating? And yeah.
In fact, it were in particular the people who are active in Fit for Food and in the SCAR working group. However, in fact, our community is much larger, so we have used the list of more or less communication issues for the 2 projects. So then we had about 200 people that were addressed, and about 40 to 50 were able to come and join the workshop. For the future, this is an important question because, of course, it defines the kind of scenarios that you like to develop. So to really target the right audience is very important, even though try also to select people who are really out-of-the-box thinkers and maybe are not so familiar in your normal daily activities, because they sometimes come up with the most creative ideas.
And there's a question to Jonas. Thank you very much, Hugo. Were environmental considerations embedded in the analysis of breakthroughs?
Considerations. Yeah. Well, it will take me a whole session to explain how we came up to the inventory, because it was a collaboration between all the partners of the project, but as I said, also from inputs from the policy labs. So basically, we had a survey where we had about 100 participants, but then the city labs has around 20 or 30 participants at local level each. Saying that, we collected all their ideas, and that's how we shaped our R&I breakthroughs with the consensus of all the participants in the project. Participants, I mean entities. And I have to say that in these entities, we have many participants that actually work performing R&I agendas. So I think it was a good exercise for everyone to come up with this specific inventory. Saying so, I should say that no inventory is crafted in stone, so it could be always better or improvable. And in fact, that's something that we hope, because we believe that the inventory of possible RNAi breakthroughs is continuously needed inputs and improvements. So obviously, if you want to do this very well done, you should do it every, I was going to say every year, but I think that's quite difficult, but every 5 years or so to check what is the status of your current projects and your current business scenarios and your current update on the innovation taking place. I hope I answered the question, but I give space for more questions, Beatrix, if there is any.
Beatrix, maybe may I give a short compliment to?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, I think I fully agree with what Jonas said, and then also in the workshop we have seen, it also was remarked by quite some participants that this check with such a scenario development process is again also addressed. The environmental or the social or the economic or the political dimensions are in this kind of access framework are then immediately checked for the RNAi breakthrough. So it is again a way of checking whether or not the breakthrough as they have been defined and based on environmental thought, social thought, etc., is then also really well taken into account, or maybe should be adapted for specific context.
I can't see any more questions. Jonas, do you want to say any last famous words to the session? I think we've got 2 more minutes.
Okay.
Hugo,
yeah.
perhaps,
Well,
messages.
I would like to thank you, well, Beatrix, thank you, of course, for taking up the questions. I would like to thank all the participants today in this session. We had up to 100 and almost 50 participants, so it means this is a relevant topic for many of you who are watching this. But obviously, the project still goes on, so I will say please contact us if you have further questions. If you were interested by our topics, please check our website, because we dedicated a lot of time to be able to disseminate these materials and to make it useful for who everyone tries to make these exercises. And finally, I would like to thank all the participants of the project as well, because it has been 3 years of work, and I think it has been an excellent project to actually debate and reflect on all these issues of food system transformation. I don't know if Hugo, you will have to would you like to have a final word?
Now, also, I think from my side, if in the audience there are people that are considering to also like to use it in the future, it is a question for us, how could we collect this? I think it's impossible for us to individually answer to all of them, but suppose that there is a critical mass of people who likes to do this exercise with breakthrough cards and scenarios, or maybe something else. It would be good if it is selected. I think in the SCAR working group food systems, we certainly like to collect it and see if we can organize something with the people from Fit4Food, if it is of relevance for at least a certain number of people. And then, so please let us know, and then we try to collect it and see if there are common activity as well possible. Mm-hmm. And thank you very much as well.
So then now it's 11 o'clock, so I think we have time for a small break. And we will reconvene in the next stream session, I think in 5 minutes, if I'm not wrong. Because there has been some changes in the agenda with the technical issues.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry, maybe I can comment on that. The other stream is still ongoing, so if you want, you can go back basically in the main room and then have a 5 minutes break while the other stream is gonna start. So as you wish, choice is yours.
There was one more question coming up, if you want to use the time, Jonas. how important are concrete visions or even images or pictures representing the scenarios for the scenario process? Perhaps that's addressed to both of you. So how important are concrete visions or even images representing the scenarios for the process?
I think we should say very relevant question, because in the way that people think, words sometimes are not enough. So you need to have a picture to link it with. It's true that sometimes it's very difficult to find that picture, but you have a good picture that really gives you that image of what you are trying to depict or to see. I find it very relevant, and I think Hugo will confirm that, because in the workshop we actually use pictures in our foresight scenarios. I think pictures are also relevant to see our breakthroughs. So that's a relevant question. That's why we put pictures everywhere in our breakthroughs and our foresight scenarios. Okay.
Yeah, I think I fully agree. It was also, if we like to have the same, if you really like to become familiar with a question, it's often helpful to do it in pictures. Even then, we may see something in a picture completely different as somebody else. Mintzberg, he was a famous economist, and he used the example of an elephant for strategy planning. The way that people see an elephant could be completely different. One person sees it maybe as an animal that is big, etc. The other one as something that is dominating. And so also images are there as helpful elements, but also we sometimes have to take care that we still then can see it in different ways.
Okay, so I think I will give the chance for everyone to have a small break, and we will start the next stream at 11:05. So thank you all.
Thank you very much.